Alright, by the time you're seeing this video, the second book and its read-through should be up for you guys to basically see. And I feel like the second book is what this video is basically most attributed to, so I'll explain basically why. Now, I'll note that basically when I initially wrote up Fay Willows' Escapades, I of course did so basically in the forums. But before I basically did those forum posts and stuff like that, I was basically using text documents. And what I basically use these basically for is to essentially write up basically what it is I would basically do. And in fact, I still actually quite commonly use text for actually doing stuff. If I go to my roll spot stuff here, you'll actually notice this is all in Notepad. Because for those basically know that I'm basically a moderator for the Rolex group on Steam, I actually put up announcements every so often for the Rolex basically that I basically come across that I'm gonna show you guys. And yeah, this is all basically in Notepad, text documents. And this is actually initially how I basically would write up Fay Willows Escapades. Now, it's worth knowing that you've been reading this basically all in Google Docs basically now. And I'll note basically after I was basically done with Dark God and giving him this story, I transferred basically all of that text from the text documents over to Google Docs. And I really wish I basically had been using Google Google Docs basically all along, because this is so much better for writing up this story. I'll note, for example, I basically have this summary basically over here for an outline, so I can actually see how many basically chapters I have, where they basically are. I can basically fast track to where chapters chapters I basically want to. And that's something I couldn't actually really do that easily with text documents. I basically have to go into one file and then go into another and stuff like that. And I basically sort of pointing this out because well, one major flaw basically using Notepad is the fact that I can't really check for spelling and grammar with it. And I'll note basically to actually do so, I actually initially had to go to a site that Dark God basically sent me, so I can basically check for spelling and grammar, and also do stuff like word count. And by the way, if I want to, I can basically go in here and there's actually a word count feature in Google Docs. Speaking of which, wanna know how many words this document actually basically is? Select all. So this would be for all of book 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, I wrote a lot for this story, honestly. I'll note that 38,593 words. If I basically go to how many words is a novel, and we go down to down here, note basically it says 50,000 words the minimum for a novel for some people, and 4,000 is basically the minimum for others. So yeah, we're basically almost up to a literal novel for the amount of text basically I put into this work. If you want to be more accurate, it's basically a novella, because obviously there's 2 stories here. And if I basically go down to book 5 here, we're just gonna go shift and this page down and get this all real quick. There we go. So here's the word count for book 5. So basically it's 8,940 words for the book 5 here. That would basically make it a novelette. And if I basically just go the other way, and yes, isn't this fun? Watch me just highlight the entire document here. Something 50 or 60 pages. And yeah, 29,653 words. So clearly this is basically in a novella, stature of, like, wording here, so to speak. And if you want to be really like, technical, then it pretty much is like a novel in, like, in totality for, like, how much you basically wrote. But anyhow, what I'm basically getting at is basically I didn't really plan out, like, any of, like, how long it's, like, this would actually be. And basically I sort of just kept writing and writing basically for the good part basically of, like, 2017 was basically, like, this was being done. And I fleshed out, like, the little details to sort of, like, really enhance the lore, or try to, basically, for Tales of Maj'Eyal. And I'll note that, like, if it isn't really obvious, I didn't really do a particularly good job in some areas. I'll note basically for one, I basically have, like, synonyms in, like, the dictionary basically up here. And part of the reason I basically have, like, these tabs basically up here is because I was actually using these to sort of, like, try and find out words to, like, add some, like, alternative spellings for, like, stuff. Like, for example, if I go down to, like, Spiritor, which is basically, like, the last chapter I basically would have done before, like, writing this, like, this video basically for history here. I basically have, like, alternate words for, like, magic. I have alternate words for, like, spells, spellcaster. And I have, like, words for, like, the arcane. And you also see, like, other stuff as well. So I have, like, say, like, tensely here. My dismay. I persisted. I have, like, variable words basically to sort of use. But I'll note that this is, like, right now, just talking, as you basically see right here, it didn't used to have, like, this much, like, degree of, like, words basically being, like, shown. It used to be, like, I have, like, a lot of, like, the same word over and over again. For example, I think a word I basically use quite a lot, and still probably do, is, like, seemingly. So basically, it's like, 39, like, words is seemingly basically in this, like, text document. Abruptly is basically another one I basically use quite a bit. And you basically get the idea. I don't want to basically have, like, the same words being, like, used over and over again. So this is, like, one of the things I wasn't really using, like, back when I was basically, like, writing this, like, up at the time. And again, it's, like, one of those things I really wish I did. And what I'm basically sort of, like, getting at here of, like, talking about, like, these, like, websites I'm basically going to and, like, using Google Documents. The thing is that when I was basically, like, writing up this, like, these files for, like, the first time, these text files, I pretty much was not using, like, all the resources that, like, a more experienced writer might be using at the time. And I'll know as well, like, just to sort of throw it out there, I also didn't, like, have the experience basically, like, checking up on, like, how writers basically sort of write novels. I'll note that in, like, the past, like, 6 to 7 years, I've actually, like, watched YouTube. I've, like, read, like, transcripts from, like, writers basically, like, giving ideas on, like, how to write, etc., etc. Trying to actually improve my writing game quite a bit as well. And when I basically, like, put that all together and look at the basically visual, like, lore I basically had for, like, Fay Willows Escapades, there's basically a lot to basically to sort of add to sort of, like, flesh out my, like, story to make it a whole lot better than what it originally was. To sort of, like, throw it out there basically, I'll note that basically in, like, Google Docs and, like, stuff like that, just basically, like, the ability to basically see, like, when you basically last did edits and stuff like that. So we can basically go right here. And if you basically go to, like, the version and stuff like that, I'll notice, like, all the edits basically I've been doing, like, recently, because, I've been doing a lot. But the thing is, like, going, like, back here, you can see, like, there's basically a lot to basically edit for, like, this stuff as it went along here. And as you can see, I've been doing this, like, day by day, just trying to make this, like, as good as I basically can. I think we're at the point where I can basically say, like, the story is basically starting to, like, pick up a little bit more. And I don't feel like I just made, like, edits I basically really need to do at this point to sort of, like, make these books better. And by the way, most of these basically happened in, like, 2024 February. I did a little bit, like, in January, for example, as well, when I, first got the idea to actually start re-editing this file. And at some point, it's going to drop off, you won't see this as much anymore, so. Now we're getting to, like, yeah, basically you can see, like, 23s, 2018s, you get the idea. And I suppose I should probably give credit where credit is due, by the way, as well, so. The sort of, like, point out there, part of this inspiration, sort of like getting me to actually get into like doing this, like, you know, editing for his document, actually came from like the Discord for Tales of Maj'Eyal. I'll note that one day, Tales of Maj'Eyal's, like, you know, forum index went down, and deciding I'd be like a good guy I am, I went to, like, you know, go to Discord where I know like Dark Card usually is, and I basically sent a Discord message to sort of let him know that his forum is basically down. And I might as well start us up so you can basically see this. While it's basically like, you know, in Discord though, basically doing this, I figured like, you know, why not? I'll basically go check out the Tales of Maj'Eyal, like, you know, Discord, because I've never actually been there. I don't usually hang out basically in Discord, by the way, so this is not basically where I basically go. But you'll basically find like, you know, lots of stuff basically here. And note there's actually like a lore like thread basically for Discord here. And yes, it is possible to actually go and like, you know, do a search for like, you know, Fay Willows, by the way. And there has been like, you know, mention where like, you know, little things basically I need to improve on, shall we say, at least. You can actually check that yourself if you want to, but I prefer not to because I made mistakes. I know I made mistakes. And also, like, you know, didn't finish my like story either, so there's that too. Even I know I didn't finish my story. I didn't actually finish a lot of the stuff I wrote for Forgotten Cults, and I think some people actually improved it, by the way, and if you're one of those people, thank you for improving the work I basically started. And a good example of that would be like the Crush Core opening lore, when you basically start as like a Drem or like, you know, a Ripping One or stuff like that. I actually wrote that lore basically right there. And to sort of like, you know, touch on like, you know, what I basically wrote here. For the Forgotten Cults lore and the item lore and stuff like that, you have to go into these like, you know, like so. I basically wrote basically the item Persistent Will, which is basically like, you know, an anti-magic trinket you basically find. I also like, you know, wrote up the stuff for the dedication and perseverance like weapons for the Krog. Basically like, you know, two unique like, you know, one-handed weapons they can basically use as a set item, because, you know, the Krog can basically use those type of weapons, like, you know, one-handed in each if they want to. I wrote the Crush Core opening lore, the Krog opening lore, Krog new character design description, and also like, you know, the Krog's like entry to the analysis of the races. And a lot of the stuff has actually changed quite a bit from like, you know, what I essentially wrote up. And note by the way as well, I would have actually like, you know, edit if like, you know, I needed to, but I actually noticed that they actually edit themselves, like, you know, whoever basically edited for them is me, so thank you again for editing that, so I don't basically have to, I guess, for that. Less work for me to basically like do, because I actually do want to basically, you know, anything I basically sort of add to the game, I actually want it to be as good as it can be. And fun fact, by the way, Persistent Will is actually something I wrote basically as like an item to like, you know, give the Dark God, just so that this story can be sort of connected to the game, like outside of the lore. Like, it's not like a fictional story as opposed to like, you know, being, say, like, you know, well, let's just put it this way. For those who actually know what the Titanic movie basically is, this is basically sort of like the Titanic movie, where it's based on a, like, you know, non-fictional event, but, you know, you could possibly like say the story is fictional, but the events basically of the story are not fictional, if you want to go that route. Though I'd rather say it's like, you know, a non-fiction work basically in a non-fiction realm by an unreliable writer, which is basically the idea, like, you know, I really basically run with, like, you know, with this character. And I'll note, by the way, in book 3, she's going to be very unreliable. And I'm basically going to try and, like, you know, make that very distinct for people who are reading. Like, you know, any edited copy. Alright, well. So, I guess I'll just, like, you know, finish off with a promise here, because I want to basically keep this, like, video basically short. Part of the reason I basically wrote up the Tales of Maj'Eyal, like, you know, lore, was not just so it could be a story for people to read, but also basically a lore foundation for people to basically build on. Like, I actually, like, you know, wrote basically a lot of, like, you know, lore basically in, like, this story to actually be something that can be built upon, like, you know, other, like, points in the story, like, you know, in the game. And I haven't really basically touched on this just yet for you guys, but there's actually a lot of, like, you know, little, like, you know, things in this game that I basically sort of, like, you know, added into, like, my story to sort of explain, like, you know, why stuff basically is. I'll note, for example, when I basically, like, you know, in chapter 4 medical treatment here, I basically had the Shaloran Swords basically come back from, like, you know, their fights basically in, like, you know, the middle of, like, continent, or what was basically, like, now, like, the north, like, you know, west of it. And basically these guys couldn't come back to Elvia. And I basically had like this sort of like little segment here about medieval plains. And part of the reason I basically had like this little blurb in here was basically to explain like, what basically sort of like, happened to all that land that was basically underneath the Noloran lands on like, the like eastern side of the continent. Like this is basically the idea here in the medieval plains that essentially the land that was basically underneath like, the Noloran like, elves, it basically was all like shoved up the middle of the continent, so to speak, into like, the landmass that's basically right there. And that's basically why like they fell into like the waters, because like, all the land that's basically underneath their like, their land was gone. Because it was all like, shoved up the middle of like, the continent. And that's basically one of the effects basically like, the spellblaze basically had on the continent. I'll note as well, I also have like, in exchange of information, when we're basically talking about the dwarves here, we basically talk about how the sand basically like, was like swept into like, right here. The sand was basically swept all around over that area, which basically explains why like the corners basically aren't over where like, the sandworm pits basically are, or tunnels. And it also could explain this as to why like, there's all these artifacts basically over there, because those are basically all artifacts of like, the corners and the dwarves that they like, couldn't pick up, that the sandworm basically collected for, over there. And it's like little things like this that like, I sort of like add into my story, like, they're not like little like, excerpts that basically have like, no purpose, like, they don't have a purpose really to the story itself, but they have a purpose to the game, and that's basically why they're basically in here. And I should probably know as well, by the way, I also fleshed out a lot of like the characters basically in this game, like, after basically, I started to read edits. I'll note that a major one I basically edited was like, the messenger here. I never really specified this guy as basically a Kornak or like, a higher, or really any human for that matter, in that sort of like, nature. But I decided basically for Rhea, basically to add like, he's got like, light blue eyes, which indicates to you guys that this guy's basically the higher. And, stuff like that, I should probably know as well. Part of the reason I basically am taking so long to do like the edits for like this like, stories, because if there's little bits that are basically like, stuff I can basically sort of improve on, like say like making this guy higher, then why not? I might as well just do it with the Rhea and like, that'll give that the dark gun, and the story can be that much better for it. Also know as well, by the way, that when I basically say like, book 2 is like when I basically edited quite a bit here as well, it's because it's basically a lot of like, content basically to this book that I really didn't like the first time I like around I basically had in. I'll note, for example, that a chapter I really heavily edited was basically Blazing Madness here. And I basically kept the sort of like same theme for like, what basically happens in this chapter, but I wanted to sort of explain it so that it made a little more sense to the fact that like, why basically this chapter is basically here in the first place. I'm not basically like the first like, the game like entry that I basically can see right now before like this is basically edited, because it's gonna probably be like a moment before like, Dark get basically guess this before like, you're gonna see this video long before like, Dark edits it, if you basically have a chance to, so there's that. But I'll note basically when I was writing this like chapter here, I didn't really have a really good flow as to like why this basically was here. It's like, why did all these like, refugees abruptly decide to like attack like, this market? And something basically changed to like, be different here is the fact that I actually changed it so that, this halfling here, he's now explained that basically the refugees are basically calm, they're sort of peace, despite having all their blondes basically like, go up in smoke. And that's supposed to be like a real like, indicator that basically like, the Zinger for basically playing mind games with like the like, the refugees at this point. And basically this is like, failed attempt to sort of like get the refugees to sort of like, do what they want, what they wanted them to, which is basically like attack like spellcasters. But in this case they like, attack the market, because okay, let's go attack the market. And it basically is like, the refugees are basically angry at those like who basically have like, what they basically like have right now. Like these guys basically in like, the Nargle like capital, they have their homes and stuff like that. The refugees have nothing, and they're mad about it, basically, so to speak. And the idea basically of like, the Ziggurats is basically trying to redirect the anger they basically had toward basically what they like, want him to basically go after. Like, they're angry about like, the spellblaze causing all the damage. They want to be them being angry against the people who basically cast spells. So that's basically what happens with like, chapter 4. The Ziggurats basically like, direct their anger appropriately where it needs to go against those who are basically like, enemy like, spellcasters is the idea. And that's something else I'm going to basically be doing by the way for like, obviously like, entries, if there's something I basically see that, like, I don't feel really, like, fleshes well the story, I'm gonna basically try and edit it to try and, like, make it, like, make sense to, like, to actually be in the story. Alright, I feel like I sort of rambled on enough for, like, this, like, video. And you basically get the idea of what I'm basically doing here. I'm basically, like, trying to edit it up to be, like, a better story overall. And I hope you guys will also enjoy what basically comes to, like, be available to you guys, basically, from, the game. Though I will note, by the way, if you really want to, this, like, there will be a link, basically, to, like, this document, basically, in the description of this video, as well as all the other videos for, like, this, like, lore. And you can basically go and, like, read what I basically have here, like, it'll be, I might be editing it, like, a bit more from, like, what you basically see in these videos, obviously, because, well, if you can't really already tell, when I was basically, like, doing, like, the read-throughs, I was basically highlighting stuff, I was basically, like, editing stuff. And there's a good chance I'm still editing stuff, basically, after these videos, basically, are going to come out, because I want this story to be as good as it can be, so no one's going to say, like, this is a really badly written story again. Alright, so yeah, I guess this is, like, more of a venting video than, like, anything else, but hopefully it's, like, beneficial to sort of, like, show us the work I've been doing, sort of doing here. And yeah, at some point I'm basically going to sort of go through, like, some of the other inspiration I basically have for, like, why things basically are in the game. But for now, that's good for this. Take care. I got a small little addition to my video there, so we're just going to start this music back up. And we're going to talk a little bit about video recordings. I got some videos basically in my, like, Steam Studio right here. And these correspond to, like, me reading basically through the Escapades of Fay Willows. Book 1, 2, 3, 4, the first half of 5, and the second half of 5. And this is basically very notable because all this basically happened about, like, in 2022 here. Basically, like, 4 years basically after the full release of the Forbidden Cults DLC. And that's basically something I really, like, overlooked, basically, like, everything else that basically is talking about, so I really felt like basically discuss it here. So, I want to basically just come around. Obviously, I'm basically doing recordings for, like, my editing of, like, the Escapades of Fay Willows. And, well, as you basically already know, I basically already, like, shown this off, but I basically, like, have gone and, like, record, like, all this basically already for, like, once, twice, and now thrice. With, like, these videos right here. And one of the things that makes this really important, just to sort of note, is the fact that because I'm basically recording it, I'm actually having to, like, fully speak out, like, these words and, like, really see, basically, if, like, there's an error or anything like that to basically watch out for when I'm basically speaking them out. Like, I'll note that I, like, mouth the words, basically, when I was basically, reading through this basically the first time back in, like, 2017. But I never really, like, fully went through and, like, did, like, recordings basically for it until, like, 2022. And I'll note that basically in 2022, I really got to, like, see basically how badly written my, like, stuff basically was in some areas. Because it's basically hard to actually, like, speak it out. And that's something you don't want to basically have in your book. You want to have it, like, both easy to read, but also easy to speak out. And yeah, it's a really important thing to sort of, like, just sort of add to, like, this video, just to throw out there. It's, like, something basically doing, like, that's different for, like, what I basically did, like, in 2017 versus now. There's probably other stuff I might have, like, also want to basically add to this video, but this is something I just couldn't think of before, like, I put this video out, just want to add this one to it, so, yeah. Alright. I didn't actually put it on loop, but oh well. Take care.